I block with this deck. That's what this deck is great for. And then I didn't block. So my excuse is I played like shit and my opponent didn't. So there's my excuse for losing. So after a week, it's been a week or 2 weeks post Pro Tour, and in Miss Prism Gone, we have found that nobody is ever freaking happy with anything. What is wrong with you people? And I'm talking about you people, and I said you people. What is wrong with you? We're going to discuss that. That's what we're going to start. So the question of the week, I think is just what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you?
What's wrong with you?
Everybody bitch. Oh, it's control. So red deck wins, has to make adjustments, and everybody loses their freaking mind this week. The metas, it's just I don't get it.
I don't understand it, because what we've come to now is an evolving meta, which I believe is a healthy meta, because we saw Briar and Viscera heavy Pro Tour, and then the Battle Hardened the following week. People had a chance to adjust. So what do? They adjusted. They went, okay, well, we need to slow this thing down and control it. So they built the ice decks, and then I think people suspected that the ice decks would come. So if you're playing, the ice decks are coming, like Oldhim and Iyslander, well, the dragons tend to do pretty okay in that matchup. So then people brought Dromai to kind of like pre-counter what they thought was going to be countering the aggro decks. And as soon as people saw it, they were like, oh, there's 3 Oldhims in the top or 4 Oldhims in the top. The sky is falling. Game's broken. It's control cancer. It's happening right now.
Yeah, it's just so I actually have I have a good question of the week, a real question of the week. It's just because there was so many of these and they're all diseased and we've all done it. But what was your best excuse you saw for bad performance at the Pro Tour? So between Twitter, Facebook, what was I know what mine is, and I'm not even gonna say it.
Yeah, I got a stash.
Because I think we both. It's a fellow content creator, and I think we've talked about it and kind of ripped on it in our one chat.
Yeah,
pretty well. Because it has absolutely nothing to actually do with the game with cards, so that's why we ripped it apart pretty good. But I'd be curious what their favorite excuse was, because let's be honest. I mean, I'm going to give you an example. I played Dromai, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been playing Dromai. I went 3-0. I'll call it 2.50, 2.5-0 at an Armory on Saturday, because Nick, we're going to time. I had a pretty good lead on his Oldhim, so he just conceded on my last start of swings. I don't know if he had a popper, whatever. We had a great game. It was a fun game. I had a blast playing Oldhim with Dromai going to time. With us two playing very ready to go time, I had a blast. I don't even care that we went to time. It was a really fun game, so who cares? And it didn't seem long. So I'll just be cognizant of that. And neither one of us made decision, but we both went through. We were on second or third cycle by the time we got to that point. It was fun. But I played on Tuesday with the same Dromai deck, and I lost round 1 to Mr. Andrew Rothamel and Oldhim, and I got hit pretty hard. And my excuse is, as I played really bad in that game, even afterwards talking with Andrew, he's like, yeah, you probably should have blocked that out. I'm like, yeah, I regretted not blocking out one turn, like immediately after. I'm like, why did I do that? I block with this deck. That's what this deck is great for. And then I didn't block. So my excuse is I played like shit and my opponent didn't. So there's my excuse for losing to Andrew.
I think I always love the common ones. I was tired. I didn't eat right. I picked wrong. I got bad There's a million reasons. So I'm always curious what people's. Yeah, I mean, I think you could give your favorite excuse from the Pro Tour, but also what's your favorite excuse that anyone's ever given you? Because I think sometimes at Armory it's even funnier. Like we've talked about that before, so it's pretty good to hear people's reasons.
And I'm not above saying I'm not guilty of it. So I'm not taking a holier than now I never do this. Oh, I absolutely have done it and I will continue to do it. So we're just looking for
I
some great excuses for losing.
Yeah, I think when it comes to excuses though, my opinion very much rests on either A, you have to be aware of it. So if you acknowledge it like the next day or acknowledge it at some point with that person that you kind of were just, oh, you know what, this was kind of a bad excuse, but I made it. I think that takes some of the
Oh yeah.
the
Well,
pressure
there's
away. But also I think if you kind of realize it right in the moment, it's very common, I think, for people to say something afterwards and then kind of realize they did it and feel bad because it's not uncommon for someone. I've had people before say like, oh man, I really misplayed that one. And then within 30 seconds of saying that, be like, but you played, yeah, I mean, you played a great game. You played it exactly correctly. I think because they realize that it comes off very
away
poor.
from the victor.
Yeah.
And like I said, I lost on Tuesday. I played a bad play. He didn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's the difference in a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in a tight game like that with Dromai, and I believe Dromai is going to be great,
Mm-hmm.
but she's fair. The fact that you can blow up dragons and not set off some specter thing that just loses all action points, ends
Yeah.
everything was ridiculous. So they made a better illusionist. And to me, the reason I like playing that deck so much is because I did like I loved this goes back to like the first calling. I loved oh, this is so mean. Like when somebody thought they had this amazing turn and I was playing Bravo and you just like red staunch it or something huge that just like they got nowhere. They just used their whole hand and you fatigued your deck one card and
Yeah.
blocked everything. And that's why after my game on Tuesday night with Andrew, and Andrew's a very, very top level player, top 20, top 10 in the first Pro Tour, top 20 in the second Pro Tour. Very good. So when you talk about the lines afterwards and how like he's like, you were starting to fatigue me. I was starting to fatigue Oldhim
Yeah.
because he was running a little bit more aggressive Oldhim and just the constant D-reacts that Dromai has in her instances, which get around so many cards and abilities,
Mm-hmm.
it was awesome. So I really, really enjoy a deck that can tank up like that, especially against these aggro decks, against Briars. Like Briar has these huge turns where the channel mount comes down and you just agree to yourself, I'm not going to have any cards,
Yeah.
but I am not going to take a point of damage either.
Yeah. You can't just sit there and take a beating. And I think that's an issue that people don't understand yet. And that's what they're learning with Dromai is a very interesting deck and how she functions because she's red line for the most part, right? Primarily a red deck, but
12 to 14 blues.
yeah, so she's primarily a red deck, but she does a very good job, which in people's heads leans them into the red deck aggro, but that's not what she's meant to do. That's just how she facilitates her game plan. It's similar to how Iyslander is so heavily blue, where you kind of have the same kind of situation almost flipped, not verbatim because the D reacts and Oasis stuff like, like
Very similar.
yeah, she runs 12 or 9 of her reds are D reacts and Oasis respites. So like you that kind of changes the exact complexion, but like the damage output reds are very low in her deck, and people I think see that deck as blue, and it is control, but it's interesting because it's like, well, how does it win with damage? It's like, well, it has it. It just plays it in a very different way, and that's I don't think people have appreciated the evolving nature so far of Flesh and Blood and how we actually have this slow evolving meta, and it takes time to counter things. It takes time to build things, and people are used to the constant data flow and of other games where sometimes because the spoilers come out so far in advance and because Living Legend, something like Living Legend doesn't exist, where people can kind of guesstimate how their decks will operate with maybe a certain deck out of the format or a couple cards they think are banned. But with the way that Living Legend functions, if you presumed that Prism was going to be gone after the first round of Pro Tour, well, guess what? She wasn't. And then the Pro Quest, well, guess what? She wasn't. And she lived on 6 months beyond what some people thought she was going to. And that if you don't guess that, then when you test, it doesn't matter. And we don't get all the spoilers until the day a set is released, so games aren't broken. When we played DBS, people had formats solved before a set was even out.
Yeah, which is I don't like that. And Flesh and Blood also brings the whole this card is trash, and then you're like, nope, that card's gold, or that card's mediocre, that card's gold, or that card's great, now I hate it. So there's a lot of that. In talking about living legends,
yes,
and this is coming from a person that I'm usually not big on alternative formats. In any game I play, I like to focus on the main format. So CC and Flesh and Blood, obviously they're trying to bring all these other formats in with pods and things that anger me a little bit, but that's fine. I guess my biggest from the last thing, pods. I hate pods.
The draft pods.
I don't like pods of 8. Not a big fan of pods. Draft is fine. I don't know how you solve that anyway, but I hate pods. But anyway, living legend format generally excites me. Like I want to play that because everybody can run a broken deck. So you can run and I'm hoping they do, where pretty much everything should be unbanned, except I think most of us can agree, except for Awakening. Awakening has to stay banned.
At least Awakening needs to stay on.
Everything else, I think you start with it in there and see how it functions. Awakening it's not a good mechanic. I think Drone of Brutality should be in it just because everybody can have it, so it's fine. You know what I mean? Whereas Awakening, one deck gets it and it catches up immediately. It's just bad card.
Drone is interesting because it probably won't matter at the beginning because the format's first solving will probably be very aggressive. The first, yes. I think the only deck that really in that game, in that format, if we assume that Briar makes her way in after National season, which she probably will, then the decks that are in it would be Chain with Seeds and Plunder. They would be Briar with Plunder and Ball Lightning more than
Lightning, which would be amazing.
And then Untouched Starvo, where he gets to kind of be king of the castle, and maybe he just replaces a good spot for him might be just replacing something like Blink with a Ball Lightning, because it doesn't block, but you don't really care about no block cards anyway because you're trading 1 for 1. But Ball Lightning kind of ramp your damage a little bit if you run some faster cards. I don't know. It depends.
Blue Ball Lightning might be something good.
Like Blue Ball Lightning, because some people were running Lightning Surge. So if you could reveal Blue Ball Lightning from hand, Lightning Surge from arsenal into an attack, and then hammer or something crazy, there's some pretty wild things you could do in that. And the only deck that would be in the format that theoretically would function in a way that might want to consider fatigue or control would be Prism. And if Prism ran even Yellow Drone as a way to recycle block and come back with things, there's some interesting possibilities. But
I just thinking about it, I still don't know how Starvo, even in the Living Legends with Seeds and with Cheerios Briar, how it's not the best. The way that you can 10-card sideboard, because you don't have to run all the arcane because there won't be a wizard anytime soon in that format. How you don't 10-card sideboard to your whatever shield you want to be it Stalagmite or like, there's just... Yeah. I just think it's got access to too many cards and it's still the king. But I'm hoping that there is a format where we get to see some high-level play with these decks to see what, with the full card pool, what people can create now.
One of the big things that will come out of it is it will answer a question of how truly powerful Plunder Run was. Because
and Seeds.
But I think that combination, specifically with Chain and Briar getting to go into Starvo, will answer a lot of questions that many people had. Is Plunder Run really that busted that it leveled that deck? And it could be. I mean, part of what made Starvo powerful is that nobody could fatigue him, could control him out of the game because of his dominate. So most decks were just willing to take most of the damage and then try to give him as much damage back. Everybody was trying to race him, and he was happy to play that game and just let people do it to him. And that's where it gets interesting, because if there's a world,
Seeds chain might be like, you want to race? Let's race.
if he's
Let's race.
just banishing like a madman, but also,
Well, and he's got block.
yeah,
Seeds chain's got the best block in the game.
he also, with Plunder Run, I think Plunder Run really changes the dynamic of how Briar plays into Bravo, because Briar didn't have an awful Starvo matchup because she could high roll back. Plunder Run makes a huge difference because people
Briar in Ball Lightning, Lightning.
People play in Sith
Because now
Captain's
Starvo,
Call.
if they get a good turn, I mean, maybe Captain's Calls is gone then with Plunder Run, just because they hit the draw. Because Plunder Run doesn't feel bad, and Briar just throwing it out for the non-3 from Arsenal, just to get that. You get the Lightning, and you have the on-hit effect.
Mm-hmm.
And now Starvo actually has to block out and isn't going to be revealing as much. So maybe I will say I'm hoping like this fall, like locally here, we can do a day where everybody, and I wouldn't do Starvo because I already know who would probably bring Starvo. So I would probably try to come up with my best Cheerios Briar or Seeds chain. Just 9 banished cards with Riftbind that are absolutely amazing. I mean, do people put in Snag for LL? I mean, to me, it's a lot of fun. It's a format that's a lot of fun, especially because the main reason I probably won't build Starvo is because I'd have to pull so many cards from other decks, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if I do Seeds Chain, I don't have to pull that much. I'm putting a ton of Blood Debt cards in that deck.
Yeah, it's just Blood Debt heavy like crazy. That's an interesting. That format will be interesting. I'm still curious what other people
Excited
think.
for that.
Yeah, I'm very curious what other people think in the grand scheme of the game.
So going back to what you said about data and using data to collect ideas, solve metas. We have not talked about this, and Blake, you brought this up about FabOnline. Everybody's talking about it. I've never used it, never tried it. I've got a lot of opinions on this, and we'll go back and forth because I'm not going to just word vomit all my opinions on this. And they're neither good nor bad. They're just very strong opinions on this. I was watching Team Covenant, and they were breaking down Pro Tour, all that kind of stuff. And they talked about it, that the data collects. And what it collects is, you figure from 10,000 users, this card, how often it was pitched, played, or blocked with. Yeah. It is giving so much data that people are going to abuse that data. Yeah, which 100%. They should, and that's fine. I'm going to give my first talking point on FabOnline. For me personally, and why I probably won't use it very often. I'll try it eventually, but I won't use it. So, Magic the Gathering Arena. I haven't played Magic the Gathering paper-wise forever. I've played Arena. I would struggle playing paper Magic, because I would probably miss all my triggers. Because when you're just playing blindly on the phone or whatever, you're like, oh, why isn't it going? Oh, I have to hit that button because there's a trigger. Don't even care what it is. Like, yep, that trigger happened. Yeah. That's probably why I played the card and it does it. If I play FabOnline, and this is old man me, it's going to make me a worse player. Because it's going to auto trigger. And if I don't have to make those triggers, chances are I'm going to miss them in real life. Like, almost for certain I'm going to miss those in real life. So that's my first negative on that.
Yeah, that's an issue that I don't think people think about sometimes, is that there are some automated triggers and things that just happen for you that you click buttons and kind of bypass, and there's no big deal. I think another thing that people don't keep in mind is that no matter how good of an algorithm you create for deck shuffling and drawing, you can never actually simulate shuffling cards in terms of the randomizing of cards. People forget that when you shuffle a deck in real life, it's completely random. In terms, if you just pure shuffle, just side shuffle, riffle shuffle, whatever.
You want to hear a fact?
What's that?
20 shuffles makes a deck completely random.
Yes.
That's the math. I read that's the math equation, is 20 shuffles makes a deck random.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, right, is that you can have things happen in a deck one time that never happen again, or happen every 500 times, where two cards get kind of stuck together the way that you're shuffling your hand and you're moving your hands together. What people miss is that when you do it digitally, it's an algorithm that says card 1 moves to slot 4, card 4 moves to slot 6, and then that's the algorithm it follows through, right? Over and over and over and over again. And it does mix it, and they'll mix those numbers around where it's like not always 1 to 4 and 4 to 6 or whatever. It'll say the third time through it might be like 1 to 3. The problem is it never actually randomizes your deck, like truly randomizes your deck, because it can't. Computers can't randomize. It's not possible. They have to have a mathematical equation. And sometimes things like that, just people miss it. They don't think about that, right? I think it was David Rude might have been on. He was talking about it. He's a store owner. He owns Harry Tarantula. Went on Flake's what's it called, the stack for Flake on Instant Speed, right? That stuff. And he was talking on Twitter one time about how like Magic the Gathering uses in Arena, they use a hand smoothing algorithm to make sure people, because they want to make sure that the algorithm doesn't accidentally like landlock people or mana screw people. So they use like a hand smoothing algorithm.
I heard that, which that's actually kind of cool. It makes it better than playing in person. Is the fact that their algorithm does make sure you don't get landlocked. I think that's a great thing to have.
It's a great thing.
It makes the game better.
Right. It
should be in real life.
Should be in real life. They should have some sort of hand smoothing algorithm in real life. But that's the problem. If you practice with a hand smoothing algorithm on digital
and then play in real life,
you don't know how to adapt to certain scenarios because you've never run into them before.
It's funny, they take their paper game, and to make it better, they put a smoothing algorithm into the digital to make the paper experience worse, which is kind of funny. So staying with my negative, and this is kind of the same point it did last time. So I played this board game called Root. It's very hard, asymmetrical. Every creature's has a different win condition, which is very cool. It's not like we all win who has this. Nope, this guy wins if he does this guy wins if he does this guy wins if he does this. There's no way I could play that in person. Like, I've played it several times with Chris through the app-based and had a blast playing it, and I couldn't even start that game. I honestly couldn't even start that game if I played it in person, because of how much hand holding does. Whereas like TTS, I know people have their gripes with TTS. I hate TTS sometimes, but it still was a very good practice tool for a very long time. You had to know how to play the game. There's games that I want to try out on TTS, board games, that I actually have to learn because there is no help. So you need to learn how to play that game or know how to play that game. Me and Chris did Star Wars Rebellion on TTS one time back during the pandemic. We had to know how to play the game. You couldn't just pull it up. We actually had to know, and you had to know it better than in person almost, because you're on the computer. So when something does everything for you, and I don't know how you make something like FabOnline and like have a trigger window where you need to know your triggers, like I don't know that you can incorporate that unless it's like TTS where you're just playing out cards.
Yeah, where you're actually like using the cards with your hand, the mouse is your hand kind of thing.
Yeah, but triggers are so important, important. And when you have more and more card pool coming out, like Art of Wars are big. There's a chance with how good Art of Wars are in a lot of decks that if I ran Kano, there's a possibility I might run one negate. Because you could absolutely just ruin somebody's turn.
Yeah, by aetherizing.
Just ruin it. That one card, could you put that in the arsenal and you aetherize them on that big turn and it's just over. You just ruined their whole turn. And those triggers are going to go past by, because if you play a lot of people with Art of War, they just slide right past everything and keep doing their stuff. And this is going to make that worse. And as people need to slow down in our slower meta and make sure people are hitting their triggers, this is going to make it worse in person. Why? Because they played on that. Once again, there's not a way to fix that, but I don't know.
Some of it is tough too, because FabOnline does some of the things that it does that are positive, it makes for a very quick play experience for people to test and do things. The issue is you're not talking to your opponent. When you're not talking to your opponent, everything's done through a text box. Sometimes things are miscommunicated, they don't work right. And then how does that kind of stuff translate to in-person play? And that FabOnline is like it's a tough spot though if you're LSS, because it presents an opportunity for people to play games. I understand and I try to have some empathy, right? Because we talk all the time about how convenient it is if things don't work for us on our normal day of the week. The fact that my wife will ask me sometimes when I can't play on we're recording this podcast on Wednesday. Normally we record on Thursday, and then on Tuesday this week my kids started school, so that's a normal night that I go and play. I didn't go because we did like a dinner with the kids. So Tuesday and Wednesday when I would normally play, I couldn't. But my wife, I live in a place where I have the luxury. She goes, "Are you going to play later this week?" Because she knows I could go play Thursday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday, and oftentimes at multiple locations. And I get that everyone doesn't have that. We have a unique opportunity in Minnesota that we have so many places to play. When there are 2 or 3 armories every single night of the week, it's ridiculous. And I get that not everybody has that experience, right? I don't think things like FabOnline are necessarily bad. I think they're in a lot of ways like a necessary evil to keep the game going forward. I do live in a world where I would agree with the side of people who say, let's just keep it self-run. Let's keep it separate from the game, and let's use it as something that is a benefit but doesn't ever hinder the in-person play. Because there have been people already that have said on Twitter, they've acknowledged, you know what, it is more convenient, and I definitely skipped Armory this week because I played quite a bit of Fab this week on FabOnline, and that's where it starts to be a real negative for the game. Is it can't replace in-person play because that's what LSS wants.
That's my biggest gripe. So here's people's complaint that I'm going to go. So they complain because Fab's big thing is to play in flesh and blood, to play in person, right? And then they argue that, well, you have to have this, blah, 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 blah. The reason why they want this in flesh and blood, and I'm not saying the reason why because I spoke with James and he verbatim told me this, but one can conclude using reasonable judgment that we are in a digital life era with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Everything is digital. And so the point of this game was like, let's get out of that digital world and play in person. That's the point of the game. So they're taking a step back on purpose to bring people together to play together. That was a reason of the game, is to get away from the computers and from the TikToks and whatever else crazy porn people are watching online. Get away from that and play in person. I mean, that's the whole point of the game.
Right.
So arguing against that, I hate when people argue, well, that's not an argument. Just stop using that. It's no longer accepted. Right. I want an auto reject button just to come up. Nope, your argument has been rejected. Come up with something else.
They've definitely, I think there was an embracing of TTS during the pandemic because there's nothing they could do about it. There's nothing we could do about it. It kind of, in a lot of ways, it saved the game
back then.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing we could do. Now the issue definitely is that balance of you can't have it replace. It also, I don't think LSS, they're in a position where they're in a no-win situation because if they demand it gets shut down, they look like the big bad guy. But if they...
I think you do. If you don't want it, you just have them.
They could. I think right now...
I would have... You're talking about something that a guy in a company spends tons of money, risked it all on to make this game, and somebody is just taking that information and just freely using it. And right now they are not making money on it, right?
Right. Nobody's making
money but on there's been discussion of a Patreon. If I was LSS, as soon as there's a Patreon up, I'm hitting it. Because TTS, nobody makes money off that TTS, right?
Right.
That's just users are putting it in there. There's no... Tabletop Simulator does so many things on so many games and so many board games.
Right.
But nobody makes a cent on it, right?
Yeah.
It's through a community workshop that stuff is made.
Right.
This is a proprietary. This is Jason not being able to get the words out right, but
Proprietary.
yes, proprietary software using copyrighted material
Right.
to make a game. So if it's always going to be free, they'll probably leave it alone.
Yeah.
If those people who run it have a Patreon or a website or a subscription, I think you have to back off. And it's
Yeah.
different than like FabDB. FabDB does a Patreon, but you're not playing with those cards, right? You're using it as
Yeah.
to store information and that sort of thing.
Right. This makes me think they have to toe that line. If you're FabOnline, it feels like they are in that weird kind of space, right, where they exist like a lot of games that have come and gone, and still exist that are kind of like crowdsourced. So you look at something like the Star Wars LCG or Netrunner or Star Wars Destiny. They have taken a community committee and continue to make the game. Netrunner less so because it wasn't necessarily a proprietary, like owned by the mouse kind of thing. But it's
Right.
interesting because Star Wars is a very, very profitable IP. One of the most profitable and most well known IPs in the galaxy, some would say. Some even in galaxies far, far away. And I think the key is those people who make the LCG or Destiny still as a group, they don't do it where they're making a bunch of money. If they make, I
They don't
think
even sell the stuff.
they don't sell
They
it.
make zero.
Right.
They
They
have
don't.
to give it away.
Yep. So what they do is they let people. They say, hey, this person will print it for you, and that's who can do it for you. And that's basically what they do. So they make it, they print, let somebody else print it. So they kind of stay away from it, and they've even managed to skirt the mouse, the most powerful of all copyright beasts on planet Earth, the mouse. Like,
And the crazy part is Netrunner is making a established comeback as a card game
yeah,
with Nisei, and the way they run it. They have there's a print and play company that has all the files,
yep,
and so you're just basically buying playing cards,
mm-hmm.
like, Ace of Spades playing cards. I don't know how else to say it when you're talking about cards all the time, because they're all playing cards at some point.
Yeah,
But your standard poker deck of playing cards type material that you can get printed with the new Nisei, or however you pronounce it, for Netrunner. And there's events. Like they're having like a Worlds coming up. I know locally the Source is going to start running events for it. So they've actually made a comeback with a dead card game. But once again, nobody's
making
I
a
can
living
go and
off of
print
it.
and play all the cards for Nisei right now
Yeah,
and put them in sleeves and be fine, right?
yeah.
I can do that for free because nobody's making money on it.
That's
There's a
definitely
printer that prints anything. It can print your
mm-hmm.
fancy anime chicks for all you sickos out there on them, or it can print the Nisei cards.
Yeah.
One or the other.
That's the big
Or
thing, I
both.
think, where FabOnline has to kind of, they're towing a dangerous line where the second that any money starts to come in that's reasonable money or actual money, I think it puts LSS in a position where their hand is kind of forced to say, hey, this is never okay. Because at that point, it doesn't really it gets into those waters of the same reason LSS says don't use our art on non-official mats. You can't take our art and print it, because now someone's making money theoretically, potentially, on their product. They own that.
Right.
They own the licensing to that stuff. You can't just put it on things and sell
And
it.
usually they haven't touched non-physical world stuff,
Yep.
but like it
hasn't
my
made
other
money.
question is, is FabOnline, and I don't know, and people might know this, is it just a person that's like, I want this because this is something that I think is good for me and good for the game? What's their end game?
So
Is it something that they thought was going to be profitable? Because I thought we were going to be millionaires by now, Blake, and we have yet to make a dime or a penny for that. But the whole millionaire dream of doing this is over now, I guess. I don't know where we screwed up.
Yeah, we definitely.
Step 1 was steal the underpants. Step 2 is question mark. Step 3 is profit. We're still on step 2 question mark, and I don't know where we went wrong there.
Yeah, so they have said, I just pulled them up on Twitter just to see, and it says it's a fan-made project, not associated. So they definitely disassociated. They're saying we're not them. It's not an official thing. But I would assume everything that they're doing, they're very responsive when people ask them. They do a lot of fixes. It it's cool that they're doing it in the terms of accessibility for people who need some extra testing and things like that. I do agree with people like Tarek has said something about it. Zach Bunn has said something about it. Yuki has mentioned it. And one of the dangers of it is that in a game with such a long cycle or a long window of time between sets, too much data is a bad thing for this game because you can't have a meta get solved. Now, granted, right now we're in a very good spot in the game where I think the meta being solved is a very momentary thing, where there's this kind of slow evolution of the meta, and I think it could be even potentially could be cyclical until we get to Dynasty, right? Aggro wins. Right. Now Control takes over. Now does Aggro find an answer to Control, and then Control find an answer again to Aggro? And meanwhile, Dromai is trying to play kind of that interesting middle ground of a setup mid-rangey deck. And I think that's where we are. That's what the game is doing right now. So you just don't want too much of an influx of data to affect that negatively, where it gets, instead of happening over weeks of time, it's happening in days, where people are like, oh, well, check out this deck. We solved this set. Oh, nope, now we fixed this matchup again. You would like it to be from like the Pro Tour to the Battle Hardened would be the meta evolving, and then another event right. 2 or 3 weeks later to now kind of shift it again, and then another event.
And now we'll get Nats.
Yeah.
To get, which, you know, this isn't on our idea board, but it just came up in my idea board.
Yeah.
What do you think about having all these nationals? So this is another good question. You have all these nationals coming before we get to Worlds.
Right.
Do you think that's a good thing to be on that same meta that whole time? Do we get stuck? I know this meta is different than what we've had, so it's hard to predict this. But, you know, with the Starvo meta, it was really boring.
Yeah, it was.
I didn't find it interesting at all. And what happens with all these nationals? Because this is the most kind of data you have going into Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you get stuck in a meta where we find out, you know, Briar's not as good because other people figured out that Dromai and Iyslander and Oldhim are better, and that's the three? And how do you think that will play into this, or what's your opinion on that?
I think that it is a little long. I do wish Dynasty would have been here to shake it up. I kind of fall into the same thinking once again as Zach Button with this one, where he brought up the fact that it feels like the events are very condensed right now. And a couple other people, like Fino, mentioned it on Twitter, right? He mentioned the fact that he hopes that next year the events, there's a little more breathing room, because it's hard for people who want to be hyper competitive to have any sort of personal life or downtime. Because if you think about it, they were in France 2 weeks ago, and they have nationals in a couple weeks, and they've got Worlds not too long after.
Isn't Australia nationals this weekend?
Yeah, there's nationals this weekend already, but like even US nationals players who traveled all the way to Europe for it are now going to go Europe 3 or 4 weeks later playing in nationals, and then another month and a half after that they're trying to play in Worlds. And it's
you
a
go
lot.
from France to Charlotte to San Jose.
Yeah, all the while.
Fun fact, I'm going to be in Charlotte in like 12 hours, so there's going to be no national event.
Yeah, I
but
think you're early.
I'll be there.
Jason scheduled
be there early.
Jason bought his ticket. He didn't realize it was the Thursday the week before, so now he's just going anyway.
This was coming out earlier because I'd asked people, is there anything in like Asheville, North Carolina where I can play while my son is with the team for like 6 hours on Saturday or Friday? But I'll already be onto the next college by the time this comes
out. Right. No, Zach mentioned, and I would believe that there's some truth to it, which is the fact that it's entirely possible that this year was relatively planned, and they tried to lock in as many venues and events and printers and things as they could, but things got shifted a little weird or moved around. When Everfest jumped, they kind of altered some other timelines. And I'm curious if there wasn't a plan for the first Pro Tour to be pushed back a month, for the second Pro Tour to be back a month and have everything a little more spaced out, which at that point it'd be fine. If there's 2 months between all these big events, I think that's good. And if at some point, if we could find a way to kind of drop in a set right after one big event with a month and a half to 2 months before the next one, that would be amazing. That would be the perfect
They
schedule.
said how many Pro Tours they want a year. Has that been released?
I don't think they've
That
ever,
I haven't seen.
I don't think they've ever set a specific number.
I'm curious what their number is, because if you take Pro Tours, Nationals, and then Worlds, there's just
every year.
that's a lot of events regardless in a year.
Yeah.
Like the callings are like not even a thing anymore. Nobody even talks about callings anymore. It's
Right.
like
Yeah.
the callings were the greatest thing ever. Now it's just like they're like the sideshow.
Mhm.
Like here's the main event. You're at like that rock concert in the middle of the summertime, and here's the main. And so then the callings on the side stage over here. Nobody's ever heard of the band, but they sound all right. I guess I'll go over there. The line's too big over here at the main stage. We'll go over the side stage and
I wouldn't be
jam out.
surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get to a point where the top dog thing, right, is to play in the 2 Pro Tours every year, Nationals and Worlds, and they space them out in a way that make it quarterly, so that it's like
That'd be quarterly.
Yeah, you try to space them in a way that's a quarterly event to some degree. You can't always do it perfect, and there will be some that are closer than others. But then the callings almost feel like they could potentially end up being kind of what they were this year, where they're different. They just, some of them are going to be on the side of a Pro Tour. You're going to run a constructed calling, but like the calling in Vegas doing team events, I think that's a great opportunity to host those things. Do a world premiere with a team event calling, or a world premiere with a blitz calling. Just let the callings be some of the different side of it. Maybe that's next year they host
Legends calling.
a Living Legends calling. Let it happen.
Oh, that'd be sweet.
Go for it. Let it do a commoner calling, man. Just like over the top, push your callings into the alternate formats. That's a great arena to test them. It lets you test stuff different. The only thing about that is then you have to start a Living Legends one would be great, because I would love to see, could they give more Living Legends points to decks that are already in Living Legends? Let's just keep it going and see who can set the benchmark, because that would actually be amazing. Imagine if Chain got more Living Legends
They should
points.
keep track of it. Who is the actual living legend?
Who's the
like
greatest
after
legend of
year
all?
one, this is the living legend
The
of
legend,
everything.
yeah.
I'm curious what their plan is for dead cards. So right now there's a lot of dead cards.
Yeah.
Blood debt cards, Light Illusionist cards. Starvo, that was a great thing about Starvo going out. We lost no cards. So it was like the best hero to go to Living Legends. He didn't have a weapon. It was just his boisterous self. Can't go ravage, the towns. Don't have to lock your daughters away because Starvo's not coming to town anymore, so you're good.
Funny enough, if you think about it, Briar too. If Briar left, the only thing that would leave that we would never see again is Rosetta and her specializations. Other than that, everything was
Pulse of Candlehold.
Elemental Rune Blade specifically. Or Pulse of Candlehold, right?
But that's it.
What you lose to her is way less.
Nothing.
Because all of the Earth cards can still be played in Oldhim, and all of the Lightning cards can still be played in Lexi. So all those talent specific cards have another option. But
I think that's why those talents are so good.
Yeah. Because they're shared like that, versus when you look at Chain or when you look at Prism. There are
light.
A lot of the light cards that
Light Illusionist or Shadow Runeblade cards.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot more of those.
Which means I think those are good supplemental heroes though to release is another Shadow Runeblade or another Light Illusionist. So I think they'll be out in the next year, I would imagine. You'd have to.
That's something that we kind of talked about that last week, is what's the timeline of that, because that's kind of tough. You hope that LSS they've said that they have a plan for that, but up to this point we haven't heard what that plan is, and it is kind of tough when you have cards that people are kind of sitting around waiting for. I'm more of the persuasion that I don't think LSS necessarily owes it to us to have to give us something quick, because they did have those heroes at the top of the metagame, but it would be nice.
A year is a reasonable time.
It would be nice to see in the first year, because I think they have to come out more than likely in a supplemental set unless they already had a planned hero. because that's kind of the trick and the push and pull of it is if you don't already have a hero planned. So say we're going to go back to a place or we're going to be somewhere where shadow is a thing again. You can just, maybe you already had a plan for another Shadow Rune Blade. But if you don't, then you have to put that in a supplemental set. You can't just jam it into a deck or into a set.
Great idea for this. That people, God, if they do it this way and people lose their mind, it'd be kind of funny. Is they come out with a promo, right? So February's Armory is the new Shadow Runeblade hero. That's what you win. They don't tell you it's going to be in the next supplemental set as well. But that's so people are losing their mind. I don't know how to win my armory. I gotta pay $150 so that I can play this new Shadow Runeblade hero. So that is why we're the Simpsons. So I just predicted that, Blake. So if it happens, that's another. Yeah. We've been thinking about all the things that we have said in our podcasts that have come to fruition with LSS. So I don't know if they just listen to us and then base their ideas around it, or if we're that good. And because we had an episode talking about when talents first came out about equipment that would give heroes and we had a full discussion, the three of us, me and Dane, around that and equipment that might do it. And lo and behold, what happens? You have a headpiece that makes you royal.
Yep. We're just the Simpsons of Fab podcast. That's what we are at this point.
That's 100% correct. And we're going to stay with that. So I just did something there. Promo card for the new hero. People, I just don't want them to say it's going to come out in the supplemental set, because I do get, this is another horrible thing. I do get a little bit of enjoyment when people start losing their minds.
The angst. Yeah, the unnecessary
because
angst.
You know they're going to fix it.
Right.
You know what's coming. But just watching people lose their mind over pieces of cardboard is amazing.
It makes me think of the big thing is I always attribute it to like TCG PTSD is what it is. Everybody has had a game burn them at some point, whether it was one of the big ones like Magic, right? You dated the pretty girl on campus that everybody loved. She was the popular girl.
Star Wars Destiny.
And she broke your heart. For some of us, it was Star Wars Destiny. It was the, maybe that the person wasn't as attractive, but they were great. They were an amazing person. They broke your heart. They
were fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
They were into weird stuff. You can mix and match. It was great.
Everybody has one of those stories, right? And we all have a card game that hurt us. So everybody has things that they get a little panicky about, it feels like. There's some of that PTSD from people's card game experience that's very real, because it seems like every time something happens, people freak out about it. They lose their minds. A perfect example, this week, what is everybody's deal with freaking out about Control and people loving aggro so much? People are so they've such a hard on for aggro. It's ridiculous. It blows my mind that I don't get it. Like, Control has become that's the swear word of the week on Twitter. If you say Control, or people like, it's cancer, it's a Control meta, it's going to be so miserable, it's going to be unwatchable. And then we had
I think it's great to watch.
It's fantastic. Imagine seeing the second cycle of your deck that you pitch stacked and being rewarded for
watching somebody have perfectly fused Oak and Olds to end the game.
Yeah. It's magnificent.
When I was playing Nick, he's throwing his stuff. I'm throwing my sink belows. I'm like, I don't need these right now. I need these at the end of the game when he's got his shenanigans where he's pummeling Oak and Olds at my face.
It's magnificent. And I think this week, my favorite tweet of the week and response, I'll give him credit. I saved the screenshot. So Reckless, or at Roche Bay said, stop complaining about Control games lasting 25 plus turns. Like it was fun for Fab players to get folded by aggro decks turn 3. Let's see how the meta evolves. And then Mo Bogsley, who I appreciate him on Twitter. He's got some good takes. He's a Kano guy too, so I'm a little partial to him. He said, maybe this is one of my favorite Twitter posts or comments or responses ever. He said, Fab players, Blitz isn't fun. It ends in 3 turns. Also, Fab players, CC isn't fun. It lasted more than 4 turns. And Oh my God, I have never
You're spot
identified
on.
with a tweet so much in my life, because how insane is it that people are like, "Oh, Blitz sucks. It's got so much variance. The game ends so fast. It's ridiculous." But then people were getting folded by Fies on turn 3 and constructed with 40 health, and people were like, "It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to ban Stubby Hammers. It's not an issue." It's like, what are you saying? He did 40 damage and OTK'd somebody on turn 3 completely randomly off of Stubby Hammers and 2 Art of Wars that he happened to draw. What? How are you telling me that's not a problem? Like, in what world?
Those same people were also posting the OTK turn 1 Fies.
Yeah.
Oh, I did 52 damage. Like 50. The worst part about those posts is like, I did 52 damage. Like you did something. You did nothing. Your
Yeah.
deck was like, here you go.
Yeah.
Whereas if you watch a real game where you come to second cycle and then shit starts going down, then I love the excuses. Well, he got lucky. This no, he didn't. He played a card game and stacked his deck so that you were going to die at the end. There's a reason why you block with certain cards so that you can purposely pitch stack a different card at the bottom. I mean,
It's, you know what it is, right? It's like, there's a perfect example of it even in other worlds, in the gambling world, right? The equivalent of aggro players being like, "I did so good, all skill, baby, no luck," is like walking in, putting a 50 in a slot machine and winning $1,000 and being like, "All skill, baby." It's like, no, you pulled the slot machine and it spit out coins for 5 minutes. That's what you did. You didn't do anything.
whoa. I take pride in selecting an amazing slot machine. Like this one's lonely, it's ready to pay. That's my skill. I rub it just right. You tap it.
It's way more skill than the guy who spent 3 hours winning the same amount of money on a poker table against a table full of people who he was having to mess with their minds and trying to get them to believe that he wasn't bluffing. And it's like, no. The guy who won $1,000 on the slot machine, just as good as the guy who won $1,000 on the blackjack table. I'm saying it right here. All skill, no luck, both ways. That's how it works. Aggro versus
That's how
control.
it works now.
Second cycle, first cycle, doesn't matter. You know what? I play Kano. Sometimes I played a second cycle. Sometimes RNGesus just gives it to me, baby.
Oh, which also in pregame, I had an RNGesus Kano moment. It was like turn 3. I played, so I counted after I played and pitched all my cards. I counted, and this is no lie, 26. 26 cards. I think I saw pretty much all. It was 5 tomes. I think I saw within the game. I mean, it was unbelievable.
I had a night against Cody one time. All right, our boy Cody, copy Cody. If you want some good Twitter takes, Cody's always got something good on Twitter. So I was playing Cody one night. Reiner versus Kano, one of the most absurd games in Fab that you can play. If you've never played that matchup, just try it once. It's ridiculous because you're both bluffing the entire game. Do I have it? Do I have it? Do I have it? And sometimes the Reiner just goes, "I'm going to go ahead and barraging beatdown." And they just look at you like, "Are you going to try and kill me here?" And as the Kano player, sometimes you think like, "Man, I'm at 22. I probably die here." And Cody did that to me. He played his barraging beatdown and just looked at me. And I thought, "Oh God, I'm going to die." And I had a good hand. I had my Wildfire Arsenal. I had, I knew I could top deck something, but I topped and bottomed, right, on my op 2 with my lens. So I knew I had one good card, and I was holding a Blazing Aether. And I told him when I pitched to Kano with the resource floating after I went Wildfire, Scalding Rain, I said, if this is Chain Lightning or Blazing Aether, I win the game right here. And I flipped over a Chain Lightning, and he goes, what were the odds of that in your deck? And I said, well, it's like turn 3, so there are like 45 unknowns in my deck at this point. Like I was holding a Blazing Aether, and early in the game I had to block with the Chain Lightning, so I had 3 hits in my deck potential of probably 45 cards.
Great odds.
1 in 15, and I looked at him. I'm like, if this is this card, I win. If it's not, and you know what? Sometimes you pray to Top Deck Jesus, and Top Deck Jesus answers. And sometimes your prayers go.
Sometimes it doesn't.
But Sometimes you just got to pray a little harder and try to manifest the card on top of your deck that you.
I mean, you should have just looked him in the face and say, "I also like to live dangerously," and then flip the card over. I mean, because essentially, when you barrage and beat down, you're saying, "I like to live dangerously," and as Kano, you're like, "Okay,
You're
I
like,
don't have the hand, but I'm gonna try myself."
yeah, I don't know. I think aggro is important to exist in the game. I think that games need aggro and mid range and control. I think they all need to exist. I think the problem is that people need to understand that what we have existing in Fab right now is this kind of special magical nirvana that I don't know that I've personally ever experienced in a card game, where there was a game that went, this is a meta, and now the meta has shifted, and now it's up to someone to answer it, and we could shift again, and then you know what? We could see another shift. During national season over the next like 3 weeks or whatever it is, we could see a shift every weekend in the meta. You could have a month and a half straight where every weekend we see an event basically where the meta shifts and evolves and changes. And I'm telling you right now, that is such an unbelievably healthy like mountaintop to climb for a TCG, because they've presented a world where they go, the card game is so good and the card pool is so vast that it's up to you to solve it. We don't even have to do anything. We're just going to sit back and let you play. And
No, that's why I'm so excited, and I do wish that Dynasty came out 2 weeks before Worlds to allow those, because the interaction with being able to add the class and take away, and this is also the funny part, is Ranger. Why do they hate Ranger? They did a headpiece. The one thing Ranger needs is a headpiece, right? That's the one thing they need. So Alice is like, God, do we just troll this community again and just fuck Ranger again? And they're like, yeah, let's do it in a headpiece. Fuck you, Ranger.
Think about the fact that of all of the headpieces that they've ever made, you look at some and you're like, that's amazing. That's so good. Some of the best equipment pieces in the game, Spring Tunic, you had the Arcanite Skull Cap, then they make Crown of Providence. Now they make this one that's so unique and has a specific thing.
Seeds. They love headpieces.
They love good headpieces, but then even the generic ones.
One could say that they love good head. One could say that.
I mean, I feel like that's an open. That's going to get trimmed and just stuck at the beginning. So it's a nice short, like 2 second, and then just into the podcast. We'll listen for a while to find that one, but yeah, I don't know. I love where Fab is right now. It's fun to play.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's in a good spot.
Yeah, and it's.
This is the first time I've played one hero multiple weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Like I've been on Dromai hard, and I don't plan on putting her down. And I might play her 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row, because there's so many different lines, there's so many different builds. You could have 3, 4 different builds with her, and it's just fun. And who doesn't like dragons? Really, everybody loves dragons.
Well,
they're cool.
Funny enough, the other great tweet I found this week that I really enjoyed was there's a guy named Remain Nicholas. And he said, when Dromai was announced, I was like, meh, dragons. That's crazy to me. Everybody loves dragons, so quit acting cool. His photo looks like he's trying to be very cool, so it's fine. He's clearly too cool for dragons. Whatever. He said that it was released, and I was like, meh, clunky stuff. Now I can't stop playing the deck and actually think it's not far from being the best deck in the format. Is this game great or what? Pat Shaw, who does the Combat Chain podcast, I believe. So he said LSS has really nailed so subtly good no one even knows how to play it, and will think it's crap for the first 2 months of playing before figuring out we broke the game design of some of these cards, which James White liked that response. Which I love, because it's true. Like, LSS has managed to design, when Iyslander first came out, when Oldhim first came out, Dromai first came out, people were like, I don't know. I think they just don't seem something weird about them. Isn't the other heroes that already exist in these classes just better? Aren't they? But it takes time. They've created these really deep, complex heroes now that are very interesting and very unique. And I just think to myself, if we could leave behind the days of Starvo and Prism and Chain and live in the days of Dromai and Iyslander and Oldhim, where things are interesting and complex and hard to solve. Oh
What if
man.
Briar comes out with like Briar Runeblade cards? Like, what if somebody's like, I better figure out a different way to play Briar and start using her card pool
Yeah.
that nobody really uses?
Yeah, make her lightning again, right? Where you do you
Right.
try to do more. Maybe people put Sting of Sorcery back in and hope that they can start to rain a little more
Right.
arcane.
They're going, there's so many,
Mm-hmm.
like, at some point, I don't know, like Ball Lightning, I wouldn't mind seeing a quasi unban. Maybe not all 9 of them, but give her a couple of them. People want that. Give her a little bit. She's not going to be here much longer. Just give her a little nudge. See what people can do with it.
It's I like the fact that now it's on people to solve it again,
Yep.
and I think
So it'll be interesting.
it's good for the game. I'm excited for national season. Do you have any?
Sorry,
You're
I have a kid. We have we have to be. Our plane takes off at 6:30 a.m. So he's like,
Yeah.
"What time do we have to get up?" 3:30. Set your alarm for. Yeah, that's what happens when you live a ways from the airport. You gotta get
Yeah.
up at 3:30 in the morning to get ready
Well,
and get down there.
I think we've basically gone through everything we wanted to talk about, but I think we should probably end with at least maybe because we do start seeing nationals. Do you have a nationals hot take?
My national hot take will be Agro Oldham will probably do well in the first one.
First round of them.
Yep, I think Agro Oldham. Um, I haven't played the Iyslander Oldhim matchup much. I know I'll be honest. Here's my spices, and it shouldn't be spice. I'm up to 3 thaws in Dromai, and I really really like them because in matches where you're not playing out dragons because you don't want to give them hit effects, you need the 6 damage attacks.
Yep.
And even with Oldhim, you throw out a 6, which you pitch 2 reds for, you're making Ash, and then it turns one of their icy hammers into a vanilla 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay taking a vanilla 4 a lot of times
Yeah.
because one, I don't mind pitching Stink Belows and Fate Foreseens to pay for stuff. So second cycle, you have them when you need them.
Mm-hmm.
Blocking a 4 with 1 card early game doesn't always feel great because you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to block the hit effects late game.
When they're relevant.
Yep, I want to have those late games. So I would Oldham, maybe a Dromai, a couple of Dromai. I just don't know how many people are playing them in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Australia's got the first one's got such a different meta than what we play here, but
Yeah.
I would say maybe an Agro Oldham.
I think an Iyslander is going to win a nationals.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I think an Iyslander.
It's going to be a top tier player that does it though.
Right. 100%. I think there's a reason.
Very very good player.
Right. Interestingly enough, if we found 2 things to be true through the cycle in existence in this game, is that there are certain classes that demand very high. It's a very pilot intensive deck. I think illusionists now have been proven to be a deck that exists in that function, and wizards. Those are 2 classes that require demand because the decks are trying to do things on a lot of different axes. They're not
in some Oldhim in there's builds of Oldhim that require it now too.
I think Guardian in general is probably in that discussion as well. Guardians, they've never, none of them have ever other than Starvo, which he's not a Guardian. He can,
we have not allowed him to be called a Guardian.
He's not on the council. He's not we've given him the rank, but we don't allow him a seat on the council.
Correct.
I think there are just certain classes that have always demanded very good pilots, and Wizard is definitely not. You're never going to get a free win with a Wizard, that's for sure. So
right.
I just think Iyslander's got a real shot. But
I agree.
You have anything else?
I agree with that. I got nothing else.
All right. Well, I suppose I'll do the wrap up because that's usually Dane's job, and I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm not wrapping nothing.
I wouldn't want this to go by and have Dane's one gripe with this week's episode to be like, "Hey, it was a great episode, but you guys didn't do the wrap up and you didn't say like and subscribe." So, everybody, thank you for listening. We appreciate you guys. We appreciate all the comments and everything. We appreciate girls too. Sorry, that's just a force of habit. Dudes, we appreciate you, bro. So thank you for commenting. Tons of comments lately. They're always fun to go back and read and interact with people and see what people think. I love that we get random tweets now, even. That's been a lot of fun. So keep that up. If you got something to say to us, sometimes the comments aren't even best. Just add us on Twitter. I don't care. Tweet something out, drop us an @ tell me I suck. This week it was great. We started the Fab Fantasy League. I was pretty thrown when I play Mike, or Popo Mike. He's the guy who makes like the cocktails and stuff after the game. I play him in the Fab Fantasy, and I was very thrown by the fact that I got a notification that said @Blakey Fresh, when Jason and Dane do podcasts, those are the best episodes. And I was like, where did this come from? I was like, man, somebody on Twitter is really attacking me. And then I realized it was in the trash talk of our Discord. And I immediately was just, I sent the Anchorman thing. I'm not even mad. That's amazing. Like, I was impressed. It was good. It was high quality trash talk banter. So we love that. We love.
Now I gotta look.
Yeah, it's great. So we love when you guys, tweet at us and comment and things. We can interact. That's always the best. So thank you for that. Thank you for following. If you haven't liked and subscribed, we would love that. If you want to share something and, help us get to that 1,600 so we can give more playsets of cool cards away, because we still have those. And I think once we run out of playsets, we've got some play mats to give away. So that would be sweet. So thank you guys for hanging out with this week. We appreciate you, and we will see you next time.